and global economies, launching the stock market into a volatile day. ABC News Live has a team of reporters from Ukraine to Russia to Poland to the White House. We have all the angles as this crisis unfolds. Good evening, everyone. I'm Lindsay Davis. Thanks so much for streaming with us. We begin tonight with the kinds of scenes we have not witnessed in Europe since World War II. Russia's all-out assault on Ukraine escalating tonight. At this hour, troops are closing in around the capital city of Kyiv. There are explosions there and throughout eastern Ukraine and all over the country. Painful reminders of the cost of war. The Ukrainians find themselves caught in the middle of a conflict that they did not ask for and one almost the entire world says they did not deserve. This Ukrainian woman standing outside of a bombed-out apartment in the country's second largest city, a symbol of the real lives in the crosshairs tonight. Those explosions rocking many communities, in some cases residents forced to take shelter in subways, while others are trying to flee the country altogether, rushing toward the border, creating a possible humanitarian crisis unfolding right before our eyes. This is military vehicles and tanks roll through a Ukrainian checkpoint from Belarus. And about an hour from Kyiv, the so-called Chernobyl zone, the site of the worst nuclear disaster of all time, is now reportedly under Russian control. In Russia and across the world tonight, protests speaking out against the war. Today, President Biden announced more sanctions, saying Putin chose this war. Now he and his country will bear the consequences. Our team is standing by in Ukraine, Poland, and Russia tonight. And we will talk with a senator just briefed by top administration officials in just a moment. But first, our Ian Panel leads us off once again on the ground in Kyiv tonight.
Tonight, Russia unleashing a brutal military assault on Ukraine, invading this vast nation from the north, south, and east. The attacks seen in videos posted online from inside Ukraine. After bitter fighting, Russian forces now reportedly in control of Chernobyl, the destroyed nuclear plant just 60 miles from the capital Kyiv. US military sources say they believe the Russians are driving on Kyiv to surround and, quote, decapitate the government there. We saw fighter jets flying over the city this morning as emergency air raid sirens wailed. A large number of Russian helicopters seen on social media posts attacking a military base less than 20 miles from the center of the capital, triggering a pitched battle. The Russians launching over 160 ballistic missiles and rockets on military installations across Ukraine, but also reportedly hitting some civilian targets. Here, an enormous unexploded rocket's lodged in the ceiling of an apartment building in Kharkiv, close to the Russian border. And here, a jet missile wedged into a damaged road. Intense fightings reported around Kharkiv, and thousands have been forced to shelter in the subways. Columns of Russian tanks and armored vehicles are reported to be still pouring across the Ukrainian border tonight. Swarms of helicopters flying in low over the countryside, creating panic and terror for the people living there. Even so, military sources say less than half of Russia's 150,000 troops have entered the country. But they're now facing off against a Ukrainian army of 250,000, but that's less sophisticated and powerful. Europe hasn't seen an invasion of this size since World War II. Martial law's been declared across the country, and all men of fighting age and reservists are being mobilized. The capital's now under curfew, and like other major cities, roads were jammed today, with people trying to flee from the onslaught. There have been massive lines at gas stations, and residents desperate for cash are lining up for hours at ATMs. Three friends, all from Donbass in eastern Ukraine, in Maidan Square, where Ukraine turned its back on Russia in its 2014 revolution, showing support for their country.
We are not afraid. We are ready to defend our country.
Marichka Podolko is a morning news anchor in Ukraine. Tonight, her husband's at war and her children hiding in safety in the West.
I think that's the worst scenario that we could have expected. I never expected it to be so bad, but I never expected Ukraine to be so calm and strong.
Шановні громадяни України.
Ukraine's President Zelensky trying to rally his country tonight, but acknowledging their losses. Officials say at least 40 Ukrainian service members have been killed, as well as dozens of civilians. Zelensky saying the fiercest fighting is in the south, where Russians are advancing from Crimea, adding that some Russian soldiers have been captured. Around the world, the Russian offensive is being condemned. The Pentagon tonight saying it'll now deploy 7,000 more US troops to Europe. President Biden met with his national security team this morning and said the world will hold Russia accountable.
Putin is the aggressor. Putin chose this war, and now he and his country will bear the consequences.
But Biden didn't sanction Putin himself, choosing instead new penalties on 4 more Russian banks and some of the country's elite. Putin's claimed he has no intention of occupying Ukraine and warned other countries not to interfere, threatening retaliation the likes of which, quote, you've never experienced in your history. But tonight, as Russian forces try to push deeper into the heart of the country, the question is how far will Putin go and how long can the Ukrainians hold out?
Ian Panel joins us now from the capital of Ukraine. And Ian, just give us a sense of the security of the capital city tonight. What's being done to protect it from Russian forces?
Yeah, I mean, it's a critical question for everybody in the capital. The city authorities have announced that they are preparing for the defence of Kiev. Interestingly, some of the fighting has come as close as 20 miles away from the capital. There is this important military airfield, the Antonov airfield, which Russian special forces landed in. Then the Ukrainians took it back. Then the Russians beat them back. And tonight it's not entirely clear who's in control of this. But I think the fear is that this is about building a bridgehead into the capital itself. The Ukrainian defence minister, in a fiery speech, essentially saying that Ukrainian forces had managed to defend well, had mounted a stiff resistance in a number of places, but he also warned that the Kremlin was planning a fresh wave of attacks, including paratroopers. I really believe that although today has been difficult, there are darker, harder days ahead. Lindsay?
Such a grave situation. Ian Panel, our thanks to you. Now let's bring in our ABC's Chief Global Affairs anchor, Martha Raddatz in Lviv, Ukraine. And Martha, President Biden has been firm that no American troops will enter Ukraine, but the U.S. and NATO are now building up their presence along the border. Explain their purpose there.
Well, they certainly are building them up. In fact, 7,000 new additional troops are coming here to Germany, and then they will be dispatched along NATO's eastern flank. What they are doing there is basically reinforcing NATO. It's a show of force. They've already got fighter jets, they've got assault or attack helicopters, and they have soldiers along those borders. But they want to build that up because obviously our NATO allies are getting very, very nervous. They also might be in place to help any Americans coming out of Ukraine. There are a lot of Americans still inside Ukraine coming out of there and helping them, and with the refugee crisis that is almost certain to happen here. But no U.S. forces inside. In fact, we have learned that they are no longer even flying reconnaissance and surveillance aircraft over Ukraine. Those flights, manned and unmanned, have taken place over the last month, many flights, but no longer. So the picture on the ground here is not as clear as it was. Lindsay.
And last night you reported that a senior Pentagon official told you, quote, you are likely in the last few hours of peace on the European continent for a long time to come. How are military officials as well as Ukrainians they're reacting to just how quickly all of this is unfolding?
That was such a sobering text for me, for all of us last night to read that. The official captured it so well about what is happening. For military officials, this is an incredible tragedy, and for historians to look at the significance of what has happened here on the European continent. For regular Ukrainians, we talked to several people this morning. They're lining up in banks. They're lining up to get water. They're lining up at pharmacies. There is no sense of panic, certainly here, but they are worried. I mean, they were stocking up on sleeping bags. They talk about arming themselves. But I also was in touch with a U.S. official tonight, and their fear is people were talking very bravely today may get injured in trying to fight Russian troops, but most likely they will lay down their weapons. Lindsay.
All right, Martha Raddatz once again on the ground for us in Ukraine. Thanks so much, Martha.
You bet, Lindsay.
Let's bring in our chief White House correspondent, Cecilia Vega. Cecilia, you pressed President Biden at the White House today. If those sanctions are working, let's take a listen.
Sir, sanctions clearly have not been enough to deter Vladimir Putin to this point. What is going to stop him? How and when does this end? And do you see him trying to go beyond Ukraine?
No one expected the sanctions to prevent anything from happening. It has to show, this is going to take time. And we have to show resolve so he knows what's coming. And so the people of Russia know what he's brought on them. That's what this is all about. This is going to take time. It's not going to occur. He's going to say, oh, my God, these sanctions are coming. I'm going to stand down. He's going to test the resolve of the West to see if we stay together. And we will. We will, and it will impose significant costs on him.
And Cecilia, President Biden, they're telling you multiple times that this will take time to see if these sanctions work. So what happens now in the interim?
Well, I think, Lindsay, the world watches and waits. And in the meantime, as you've been saying, all of these lives, these millions of lives are on the line. Look, the politics of all of this and the reality here on the ground at the White House. President Biden is saying two competing things. He's saying if Putin isn't stopped, he could be emboldened enough to move beyond Ukraine. And at the same time, you heard him repeatedly, he says that on the other hand, these sanctions issued today aren't going to stop Vladimir Putin overnight. The White House says they concede they don't know how to stop Vladimir Putin. They cannot control what his next move is going to be. That is out of the realm of the possibilities of everything they can do from this White House. But they say these sanctions that they've issued today are going to isolate Moscow over time, and that will hurt Putin's bottom line. They hope that is enough to stop him. They say that these are the most significant and impactful sanctions ever issued. But, Lindsay, the reality is you also heard President Biden clearly say today, check back with me in a month and we'll see how they're working.
Yeah, we'll see how it goes. Cecilia Vega reporting in from the White House. Thanks so much, as always. Joining us now is Louisiana Republican Senator Bill Cassidy. Senator, thanks so much for joining us tonight. All senators just received an unclassified briefing from top administration officials. What concerns you the most tonight about the dramatic situation that's unfolding in Ukraine as we speak? Senator, I don't know if you can hear me. We're having a difficult time hearing you. Is there anything that we might be able to do? There we go. That unmute always works like a charm. Okay. Do you need me to repeat the question, or you're good?
I'm good.
Okay.
There's concern that the sanctions will not be adequate. I will point out that they are not sanctioning the oil and gas export industry of the Russians. That is their principal source of revenue. It's also my understanding they're not sanctioning the banks that are involved with this oil trade. Now, as long as he's able to get money selling natural gas and oil, he doesn't need to dip into his reserves, and he's going to have an increased resiliency. So my concern, and the kind of concern that was on the call, is that the measures taken are half measures, and he won't stop until you take full measures.
And President Biden announced more sanctions today and again reiterated no American forces will be used in Ukraine. If sanctions aren't working, what needs to happen next? I suppose you're going to say we need to do the full measures next, but then beyond that, what do we need to do?
Well, we will bankrupt them if we take on their oil and gas industry. We've seen this before. In the Reagan administration, the Saudis flooded the world with cheap oil. That's why the Soviet Union fell. They didn't have the revenue to maintain their war machine. Now, they're supplying 40% of the world's natural gas. They need to be pushed out of that market share. The U.S. has to increase production. If we do that, they lose the revenue. History, in this case, prologue is the future. If we're able to go after his economic well-being, their economy collapse, he cannot support his war machine. We do that without committing U.S. forces. That's a good thing.
I guess I have a two-pronged response then. Why are we not doing that at this point in your estimation? And if the assumption is from Putin that we will, why would he go forward with this?
So I think he feels like we cannot do it. The EU is very dependent upon Russian natural gas and Russian oil. And we actually buy Russian oil. Now, our oil industry has been hamstrung. The administration, in a variety of ways, has attempted to inhibit the development of North American natural resources. We got to take those shackles off. We can do it safely in an environmentally sound way, which, by the way, is more environmentally friendly than what the Russians do. But we've got to supply ourselves and our European allies with what they need to have a modern economy. Otherwise, we can't go after the Russians. Therefore, they can still finance their war machine.
This is now the biggest armed conflict in Europe since World War II. Is there a red line, in your opinion, that Putin and Russia could cross that U.S. troops would have to get involved at that point?
Clearly, it's an invasion of an Article 5 NATO country. And they've increased their forces adjacent to the Baltic states and to Poland. So we are 7,000 troops that are going there. That's supposed to send a message. Frankly, we need far more. So if one is attacked, all are attacked. We saw our European allies respond after 9/11, as if they were attacked as we were attacked on 9/11. And by our Article 5 treaty, we should be increasing our forces in the Baltic states and in Poland. Putin only responds to strength. This is not the Russian people. They're the victims of this as much as the Ukrainians. It is Putin, and he's only going to respond to strength.
You, of course, serve on the Senate Finance and the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee. Drilling down a bit on sanctions, President Biden said that there was disagreement about cutting off Russia from the SWIFT banking system. The move would cut off the country from most international financial transactions and, in effect, halt its profits from oil and gas production. Where do you lie on this issue?
Yeah, so the president needs to show presidential leadership, bringing our allies to a point of agreement. Now, until we can help replace some of the Russian oil and natural gas which they supply, they're nervous about being unable to import it. But as long as they're buying it, Putin can finance his war machine. So I think the president needs to, one, show leadership, and secondly, he needs to show that he can help them wean themselves off of Russian energy in a way that they can maintain their prosperity, but not finance what Putin wishes to do.
And while many of your fellow Republicans have made strong statements in support of Ukraine, some have also taken the opportunity to strongly criticize the president, including the number 3 House Republican, with this growing global geopolitical crisis. Is it appropriate to show our domestic divisions for the world to see at this particular time? We've lost Senator Cassidy. Okay. All right. Our thanks to the senator for his time. And President Biden today said Russia's invasion of Ukraine has led to a complete rupture in U.S.-Russian relations. And for some time, for some in Moscow, it's also led to a divide, with some even daring to protest Putin's military moves. ABC's James Longman is in Moscow with the latest on how the people of Russia are reacting tonight.
Sadness and shock in Russia tonight. The government says most people support Vladimir Putin's war, but in Moscow tonight, protesters risked arrest to show their opposition to it.
Hundreds of people were on this street earlier here in downtown Moscow to protest the decision by Vladimir Putin to invade Ukraine. They don't feel that this is a man that represents their interests, and they're just taken away, put in these trucks over here. You can see the riot police in blue. There have been over 1,000 arrests across the country, in fact, at protests like these in over 50 cities. A large number of people here in Russia do believe what Vladimir Putin says because they've been watching and listening a lot of the state-controlled media, but for these mostly young people here, it takes a special kind of bravery to protest in Vladimir Putin's Russia, especially on the day that he goes to war. So why are you here, ladies? Why have you come?
We would like to support our friends in Ukraine. We're just against the war in any kinds of this. That's why. This is the reason.
Do you feel scared being here?
Yes, a little bit.
I mean,
shame for our government.
Last night, blasts were heard around Kiev as Russia launched its major invasion into Ukraine. It came after Putin addressed the nation, announcing a special military operation against Ukraine, saying there was no other option. While students protest in the street, some of Russia's cultural elite added their voice online. Famous Russian actors and presenters are putting up black squares on their Instagram profiles. Fear and pain, no to war, one late-night show host has written. Students on the street and celebrity criticisms are irritations the Kremlin can ignore. But it's making sure the wider public is fed a very specific message. Russian state TV is trying to dampen the tone.
Oh, well, lies have a habit of catching up with you in the end.
Because even Putin's supporters, many ordinary Russians, regard Ukraine with real affection. Many will have felt uneasy about an attack on their southern neighbour.
So would you be upset if there was an invasion?
Yes, definitely, yes.
That's why the messaging over this war has been so tightly controlled. It's not being called an invasion. The government says only Ukraine's military is in its sights, and there's a pledge not to kill civilians. The media overseer has even said outlets will be fined if they don't report what official Russian sources are saying. But many Russians aren't interested in war, especially if looming sanctions cripple the economy. An independent poll released by the Levada Center on Thursday shows that only 45% of Russians supported recognition of the separatist states in Ukraine. For students like Albina and Maria, the war means their futures are thrown into yet more uncertainty.
We don't support our government, and we don't have any direct channel how to say it. If you want to fight for your future, you need to speak up.
Would you have a message for Ukrainians if they're watching?
We respect Ukraine. We think that Ukraine is a really nation, and we don't choose this way. We want just peace.
Our thanks to James Longman. U.S. intelligence says that this is just the initial phase of a, quote, large-scale invasion. To help us understand what's happening now and what could happen next is ABC News contributor and retired Colonel Steve Ganyard. Steve, thanks as always for joining us. Let's start with that statement from U.S. intelligence. What is the evidence that this is just the start of something much bigger?
Lindsay, we know that the Russians committed only a portion of their troops in these first waves that we saw late last night, and so it would just make sense that the next waves would come in. They did things like softened up targets with surface-to-surface missiles. They took out all the air defenses. They've been taking out command and control. So we have just a few minutes ago, the defense minister, Ukrainian defense minister, said that they're expecting a new wave, and it will include paratroopers. So the Russians are very good at doing parachute operations. They actually put parachutes on their light vehicles. So the Ukrainians are worried about this next wave about to start. Some of the good news we did hear, the Ukrainians retook the Antonov airport, which is one of the major airports right outside of Kyiv. So that's good. They're coming back. back. They had lost it earlier in the day, and they've taken it back. We do know, though, that there's heavy fighting going on north of Kyiv, that the infamous Chernobyl nuclear plant apparently has been overrun by the Russians. So about only 60 miles away from Kyiv now. So we'll see if the Ukrainians are able to sort of fall back and begin to defend more vigorously the outskirts of Kyiv. And in the south, we know that the Ukrainian defenses were quite weak. And so when those forces came up from Crimea up to that small town, port town Kherson, that we talked about earlier, that apparently fell pretty quickly, and they're struggling to maintain the south. So all in all, we knew that this would be very difficult for the Ukrainian military. That they're outmatched, outgunned with the Russians, but it's their territory, and eventually it'll probably turn into some sort of an insurgency, a militia, as they defend their homeland with what they have.
Russia's attack right now looks like, as you were just describing, really a three-pronged effort from the north, the east, and the south. Walk us through what Russia might be trying to do, what Putin's endgame might be.
Yeah, Lindsay, you and I talked about this a couple days ago. We didn't know then, and I don't think we know now. We know that what Mr. Putin wants is, we know he wants the elected government in Kyiv to fall. We know that he wants to put a puppet government in, a malleable government that will bend to his wishes, that won't flirt with NATO or EU, joining the EU. So how does he do that? He can either go in and assassinate the leadership, which is not beyond the Russians. We've heard the Pentagon today say that Russian special forces are actually surprised. I'm not sure why, but the Pentagon was surprised at the amount of Russian special forces that have infiltrated different parts of the country. And we know that there were hit lists, so they can go in and just assassinate people. The other way to do it would be to go around the city of Kyiv and to lay siege, to envelop that city and basically strangle it. Just turn off the power, turn off the water, and wait for the government to surrender. The last thing is they could probably come in and take a good, 1/3 of the country, that eastern part of the country, up to the Dnieper River, which, remember, it's sort of divided north-south, coming south of Kiev down to the Black Sea. So it really just depends on what Mr. Putin wants.
And that's something I was curious about. Did he even mean it, though, when he said it? Because I know you're saying that he would have a hard time holding it, but when he says we're not planning on it, can he be trusted at his word?
No. The old saying, when somebody's lips are moving, they're lying. So everything Putin says is disinformation. Everything Putin says is to have you think one thing while he does another. So we can only see what deeds are, and the deeds right now are that he has invaded a sovereign country and that innocents are dying by his hand. And so until we see what he really wants, we really won't know what the end game is.
We've given significant military aid to Ukraine in recent years, like Javelin missiles, but in one day we've already seen huge losses by those forces. Can that aid make any significant impact against the Russians? I saw it put one day today that it was said that this is David versus Goliath, except in this case Goliath wins. Is it just as simple as that?
Yeah. It is. It comes down to F equals MA, and at the end of the day, the Russian military has had 15 years to come back from its nadir, and it's a quite capable military across the board. Mr. Putin has put a lot of money and effort into bringing back the glory of the Russian military after its downfall after the Cold War. The Ukrainian government doesn't have the money to create the kind of defensive force, even though NATO's been helping them for years and years now. But I think what's going to happen is once the Russian military, if they finally roll over, whether it's weeks from months from now, then you're going to see these local militias, people who have weapons hidden in their closet, who have maybe a javelin here in the shed, and I think it's just going to be sort of like an insurgency like we saw in Iraq and Afghanistan. And whether that's enough to eventually bleed Mr. Putin to the point where he's ready to give up and pull out, that's the question. But again, time is the real factor here. How long will it take until Mr. Putin can be dissuaded from continuing this war against the Ukrainian people?
Always a pleasure to have you on the show, and your insight and time, we really appreciate it, Steve. Thank you.
Thanks, Lindsay.
When we come back, more on the crisis in Ukraine, and back here at home, a massive winter storm threat for millions. A verdict in the trial of those 3 officers charged in connection with the death of George Floyd. We have the latest details. But up next, our conversation with an American school teacher trying to flee Ukraine right now.